My name is Emily, and I'm 32 years old. You know the saying, I'm a housewife carrying the weight of the world? That's exactly how I feel. I wake up early every morning, send my husband, Harry, off to work, and then it's dishes, laundry, cooking, days just blend into one another. I don't really have any close friends in the apartment building, everyone keeps to themselves. But there's one exception, Joe from upstairs. He always greets me warmly and chats for a few minutes. I first met Joe on the apartment stairs. One day, I was returning from the grocery store with my hands full of bags. I stopped on the landing to catch my breath, and that's when Joe came downstairs. He saw me struggling and said, "Hold on, Emily. If I let you carry all that, I'll feel guilty for weeks," and took the bags from my hands. "No, Joe, I can manage," I said, but he didn't listen. He chuckled, "What's the point of being neighbors if we don't help each other out?" That day, I realized how thoughtful he was. Over time, we started crossing paths more often. Joe would always smile and ask, "How are you, Emily? Do you need anything for the house?" Normally, I wouldn't talk to men like that, but his conversations always felt brotherly. One day, there was a knock on the door. I opened it, and there was Joe, holding an empty coffee cup. "My wife went to the hospital today, and I can't go a day without coffee. Could you make me a good cup?" he asked with a grin. I laughed. "Sure, why not?" But something stirred inside me at that moment. I made the coffee and brought it to him. Usually, I'd hand things over at the door, but that day, Joe started talking about his wife's health. She'd been unwell and had been visiting the hospital frequently. As he spoke, I felt a pang of sympathy. "That must be so hard," I said. From that moment on, a coffee routine began between us. Days turned into weeks, and soon, every time I stepped out, it felt like Joe was there. "Come on, let's have a cup of coffee," he'd say. At first, it felt neighborly, but as time went on, I started to sense a warmth in those conversations. Those coffees, those short chats, they made me forget the exhaustion of my day. But sometimes, without realizing it, you find yourself on the edge of a wrong turn. That day started like any other. I sent Harry off to work, cleaned up breakfast, and spent the day tidying and cooking. Then the doorbell rang. Joe was standing there with a plate of dessert. "My wife made this last night, and I thought we could share it." "It'd be nice," he said. There was something in his eyes, something that went beyond simple friendliness. I took the plate and said, "Come in, Joe. I'll make us some coffee." He stepped inside and sat in the living room. Normally, I'd never let anyone in, especially when Harry wasn't home. But that day, Joe felt different. He had his usual friendly smile, but his demeanor carried an unusual warmth, and his words felt more meaningful. I felt uneasy, but I silenced that feeling. "It's just coffee," I told myself. But it didn't end with coffee. As we sipped, Joe started talking about marriage. "You know, Emily, love changes after marriage. The initial excitement fades and turns into something else." "Are you still happy with Harry?" he asked. I froze for a moment. What kind of question was that? "Of course, I am, Joe." "Why do you ask?" I said, but the words felt forced. His gaze, his knowing smile, it made me so uncomfortable, yet strangely warm at the same time. The conversation deepened. Joe talked about his wife and the struggles of marriage. "Sometimes, people just want to breathe differently, to see another life," he said. I didn't know how to interpret those words, or maybe didn't want to. His words lingered, stirring conflicting feelings within me. At one point, we made eye contact. I was holding my cup, looking at the floor, but Joe's eyes were fixed on me. I had never felt a gaze like that. I didn't know what to do, and yet I couldn't look away. "Emily, you're such a sweet person," he said. Such a simple phrase, but its effect was profound. My heart started racing. Suddenly, Joe stood up, placed the dessert plate on the table, and sat beside me. That was the moment I should have stopped everything. I should have said, "What are you doing, Joe?" But no words came out. He took my hands and said, "Let's just talk." But that conversation sparked something that I can't even put into words. It felt like a dream, a haze. Afterward, Joe left. As soon as I shut the door, my legs felt weak. I washed my face and looked in the mirror. What just happened? "Emily, what did you do?" I asked myself, but I had no answer. Inside, there was warmth and overwhelming guilt. Living through that moment felt like time had stopped, but now, in hindsight, every second feels like an eternity of regret. All those coffee chats, the desserts, the little acts of kindness, it all led somewhere, and I was too blind to see it. Or maybe I just didn't want to see. The next morning, I woke up feeling heavy, as though I'd been carrying the weight of a bad dream all night. But this wasn't a dream. It was real. Harry sat at the breakfast table, sipping his tea. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at him. Inside, a voice kept shouting, "How can you face Harry after what you did? What if he knew?" But another voice whispered, "What's done is done. No one has to know." These two voices battled in my mind all morning. As Harry left for work, he turned to me, as he always did, and said, "Take care of yourself. Call me if you need anything." His voice was so normal, so pure. My chest tightened. I forced a smile and said, "Okay," but behind that smile was a mountain of guilt. I tried to distract myself by cleaning and tidying up, but my hands were trembling. Instead of working, I sat in the living room, lost in thought. Why didn't I stop? Why did I allow it? Joe gave those signals, said those things, and I could have said no. But I didn't. How could I do this? Around midday, I stepped out to go to the market. As I opened the door, I saw Joe's wife standing outside. She smiled warmly and said, "How are you, Emily? Everything okay?" Her voice was so kind, so genuine. In that moment, the weight of my guilt hit me like a brick. I couldn't meet her eyes. I mumbled, "I'm fine, thank you," and hurried away. As I walked to the market, I berated myself. What have you done, Emily? How could you betray this woman? Your husband? Your home? How did you become this person? Inside, there was a storm of regret and self-loathing. That fleeting, forbidden moment with Joe had given me excitement, but now it was replaced with overwhelming shame. Back home, I closed the door and collapsed to the floor. Tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't want to look at myself, didn't want to face my reflection. I wanted to escape everything. But there was no escape. I made a promise to myself, never again. No matter what, never again. But when you lie to yourself, even you don't believe it. And that's exactly how I felt. I avoided Joe as much as possible after that. I didn't answer the door when he knocked, and I checked the hallway before stepping out. Yet, a small part of me missed seeing him. That memory of the moments we shared lingered. I wanted to forget, but I didn't want to erase it entirely. That contradiction kept me awake for nights. One thing became clear, though, The price of that fleeting thrill was a lifetime of guilt. Harry's love for me, Joe's wife's innocence, it all weighed on me like a burden I'd carry forever. And the cost of what I'd done would haunt me for the rest of my life.